Hello and welcome to today's Sport and Exercise Medical Sciences BSc taster session. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is India Dean Smith. I'm a current medical student here at UCL and I'm your chair this afternoon. I also studied IBSc Sport and Exercise Medicine. We are hoping that this taster session will address those course-specific questions you may have and will help you to gain an insight into what it is really like to study on our Sport and Exercise Medical Sciences undergraduate program. So this afternoon, our speaker, Dr. Flaminia Ronca, will introduce you to some of the great science and medicine that you would learn as a student of Sport and Exercise Medical Science BSc here at UCL. Dr. Ronca will also provide a summary of the Sport and Exercise Medical Sciences program, and there will be a Q&A session for the second part of the event. This session is being recorded and will be made available on our website following today's event. We're here to respond to your questions, so please share those throughout using the Q&A function on Zoom. Now to introduce our speaker, we have Dr. Flaminia Ronca. Dr. Flaminia Ronca is the Program Director of Sport and Exercise Medical Sciences. She researches how exercise impacts the brain, looking at brain development in children and cognitive performance in adults. Dr. Ronca works with some of the best neuroscientists and engineers in their fields to develop together the area of exercise neuroscience. They founded the Exercise Neuroscience Research Group, ENRG, at UCL to establish this exciting and growing scientific field. This research has been influencing policy and decision-making in various fields, from law enforcement to primary education. Over to you, Flaminia. Thank you.
Thank you, India. So hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And as India explained very eloquently, we'll give you a little bit of a taster of the type of research that our team does at UCL. This is, of course, research done just within my field, but do remember that it's an example of many, many things that happen at UCL. I do have colleagues that do research in within sports medicine, but focusing on injuries or population health or obesity or cancer. So lots of things happen at UCL, but we don't have enough time to go through everything. So we're focusing on the brain today. So I hope this will interest you. This is me testing out a brain imaging device that we use for most of our research. And as you see, I'm very happy because we do find it quite fun to play with gadgets in the lab and get people to exercise and scan their brains and see if the brain is still working. And clearly, as you can see in the last image at the bottom, my brain wasn't working very well that day. But let's see what happens to other people. So we focus on the frontal part of the brain, or the frontal lobe. And the prefrontal cortex, which is in the image on the left, where you see in red, is responsible for what we call executive function. So making decisions, planning, processing information, and acting and controlling our behavior as well. So these are the types of processes that we focus on, which is one of many things that our frontal lobe does. So one of the studies that we did with our students, so this is both third-year undergraduate students and master's students as well, we worked together and we brought in lots of participants. We conducted brain imaging on them and some cognitive tests. Then we brought them into the lab and we got them on the treadmill. And we did a VO2 max test, which is a test of maximal oxygen consumption or a test of endurance and fitness. And we took them straight off of the treadmill. They were completely exhausted. We got them back into the brain imaging room and tested them again. So this is what the brain imaging looks like. And these are our students setting up the brain imaging on our participants and then taking them through the cognitive test. So these are definitely things that are available for students to get involved in if they decided to study on our course. And this is an example of what the VO2 max test looks in the lab. So we get a participant on a treadmill, where they start by walking, and then the treadmill goes higher and higher and higher and steeper, and it goes faster and faster and faster. And within 10 to 15 minutes, the participant is taken from walking to running at an incline, and they have to keep going until they're exhausted and they stop. So that's what a VO2 max test on a treadmill looks like. And then on the bike, it's a very similar concept. You start with a very, very easy resistance on the bike, and then you go harder and harder and harder until you just can't go anymore. And this mask measures how much oxygen our body is using and how much carbon dioxide our body produces. And that gives us a measure of a person's fitness, but it also gives us a measure of their health. So while I use this technique with healthy people, I do have colleagues that use the same technique with patients who might have a heart disease, or they might have COPD, so pulmonary disease, or patients who are obese and might have metabolic diseases, etc. So it's used in lots of contexts. In our case, we worked with healthy participants. So here's what we found. So remember, we got them to do some brain imaging, then they did a VO2 max test, and then we did brain imaging again. And if you look at this red part of the brain, this is your forehead right on top of your eyes. So you can imagine the eyes of the person are right here and they're looking at you. And you can see yellow means higher activation. So essentially what this is showing is there's specific parts of the brain that become more active after we've exercised. And each of these little brain pictures relates to a person doing something different. So they're all different cognitive tasks. And what's really interesting is that if you look down here, reaction time improved pretty much in everybody. So not only did brains become more active, but also responses became faster. So lower is better in reaction time because this is time in seconds, so less seconds to respond. So essentially the message here is that 15 minutes of hard exercise will make your brain more active, and it will make it faster as well. Now it does get even more interesting, because not only do we see brain activation in very specific regions immediately after exercise, but we see a relationship with what we call VO2 max. So people who are fitter improve more. This is what this graph is showing us. Here we have level of brain activity, so change in brain activity. So here means over here it's a greater increase in brain activity to the right, and a higher VO2 max means fitter person. So people who were fitter improved even more after exercise. And finally, we've got some brain pictures here where we took the same participants back into the lab 8 weeks after doing a fitness program. They got fitter. And what happened was that the participants who became fitter saw an even greater improvement in brain function. So 15 minutes of exercise are great for your brain. They make it more active. If you get fitter, you will benefit even more from that effect. So there's lots of reasons for us to encourage each other to do exercise. Now, this is cognitive function. We've talked about reaction times and errors and inhibition, but mood and mental well-being are a very important aspect of this research as well. So what we did in a different study, and this was run by students as well, is we got a couple hundred participants to do different types of exercise on different days. And we measured their mood before and after that session of exercise. So if you look down the bottom, we start here with rest, and this is the change in their mood before and after 30 minutes of doing nothing, so playing with their phones. And what you can see is that actually there isn't really a change in a person's mood if they don't do anything. And several people actually had worse mood after 30 minutes of rest. And then we have 15 minutes of stretching, 15 minutes of a very light cycling session, 60 minutes of light cycling, 30 minutes of strength training, 30 minutes of good hard cycling session, and here a maximal intensity cycling session. So what we see is that any amount of exercise improves our mood, but if we did 30 minutes of a good hard session, that is what improves our mood the most. So the message here to tell our friends, if they're not feeling very well, a bit under the weather, friends a bit depressed, encourage them to go do a bit of exercise. If they can't be bothered to do any exercise, 15 minutes of stretching is good enough to improve your mood a little bit. But if they have the energy to do a little bit more, they will benefit more. So a good 30-minute run or cycling session is the ideal amount of exercise to do to improve our mood, if we're willing to do that. Now, every person's different, because as I've said, there are people who decrease in mood with a resting session. And if you look down here, some people's moods did get worse after exercise. And that is what really we find really interesting, So it looks like different people enjoy different types of things. So I might enjoy cycling, but my friend might enjoy strength training. So there's also an element of individual recommendations that we should make. And this is quite, I find this graph quite funny because we've divided our participants by gender, and we have males in blue and females in red. And it looks like running and strength training improves mood in both men and women. Women seem to get a much bigger improvement in mood from both types of exercise, which is quite nice. But what's quite funny is that while women seem to enjoy walking and their mood gets better after walking, men's mood looks like it got worse after walking in some cases. And they seem to feel very, very sleepy after a yoga session, whereas women didn't change very much. So this isn't necessarily being in a bad mood. It just means that people, these people after walking felt maybe less alert and less energetic. So this is what we were measuring. So I can see why yoga would put a few people to sleep. And finally, personality plays a role in this. So like I said earlier, different people like different things. And we have a personality trait called extroversion. So a person who is very extroverted is a person who likes to be around lots of friends. They like parties, they like loud spaces. Maybe they wear very bright colors because they're attracted to this stimulus. Whereas, and these people will sit over here on our graph. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have introverted people. So a person who's introverted prefers to maybe be with one person instead of being around 10 people. And they like quiet spaces where they can have nice and calm conversations. They don't like loud music. They would rather listen to something that's perhaps not too loud, not too noisy. And what we see in terms of exercise is that extroverts seem to enjoy a high intensity session more than introverts in this case. They both enjoyed it, but extroverts seem to really, really enjoy high intensity sessions, which kind of makes sense if you think about an extrovert and the fact that they like lots of stimulus and lots of loud music and being around people. And we see the same thing over here. So neuroticism is another personality trait. Which is not necessarily negative. A person who scores high on neuroticism, it simply means that they remunerate information quite a bit. So if I score high in neuroticism, it means that I play things in my head over and over again. I had a conversation with my friend earlier today, and I replay that conversation in my mind, and I wonder, why did I say this? Why did they say that? Or you're constantly thinking and analyzing everything around you, and that can be quite stressful sometimes. So people who score high on neuroticism have those types of traits, and people who score low on neuroticism tend to be able to control their emotions a bit better and be a bit more stable. So what we see in terms of exercise is that we had a condition where people had to exercise for 15 minutes at a low intensity, but they were being watched for those 15 minutes. So people who score high in neuroticism didn't really enjoy that very well, and people who are more emotionally stable seemed to enjoy that quite a bit. Okay, so that was a research that we've done in adults, but I want to talk to you a little bit about research that we've done with children, because exercise is important for everyone. And if you remember, when you've been in school, you do tend to sit down for quite a long time, and school can become very boring and very tiring just because you're sitting in front of or at your desk the entire day. And we know that obesity, child obesity specifically, is a very big problem that we're facing in the UK and globally. So what we did is we went into schools and we worked with the teachers to make lessons a bit more active. So the children would stand up and move around and walk around during lessons. So there was no physical activity, no exercise or no intense exercise, simply more standing and more time walking around during the day. And what we found, if you focus on the yellow blob over here in the yellow box, over here. So we've got a blue box and a yellow box. This was before the intervention and after the intervention. And what you see in the intervention group is that obesity went down. So this is the mean waist to height ratio, which is a measure of how big our bellies are. And that decreased quite significantly in the intervention schools. And there was no change in control schools. So schools that did not get the intervention. So there's a great message here that we can tell our friends, or we can tell ourselves, that if we spend more time standing and walking during the day, that can help us maintain a healthy weight. So doesn't necessarily have to be high intensity exercise to lose weight. So now that I've said that, I'm going to pass on to Evie Watson, who is a PhD researcher at UCL. She's currently completing a research degree. She's in her second year, and she has been studying the impact of physical activity and obesity on cognitive development in children. So Evie, I'm going to pass over to you. I'll change the slides.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There we go. So yes, as Flaminia said, I'm just going to run through a few of our exciting recent results and talk through some of the research that we've done specifically in children, looking at how physical activity can benefit them, particularly from a cognitive development point of view. So this first slide just sets the scene, and it's some data that we collected where we asked around just under 400, so 369 children in primary school, to complete a questionnaire asking them how much sport they do. And we have, as you can see in the small graph, some different types of specific sports. And then we brought all that data together into an overall physical activity score, which is the bigger graph at the bottom right. And there are a few things I wanted to highlight here. The first is that there are some sports where there are differences between boys and girls. And as Flaminia said, looking at these differences in different groups of people, whether it's personality or sex, is part of what we do. So, for example, in football and skipping, we can see there were differences in participation between boys and girls. But then the bigger picture and kind of more important thing to take from these graphs is the development that we saw across primary school. So the x-axis, the bottom of these graphs, is the primary school years. So from year 1 on the left-hand side, when they're youngest, to year 6 on the right, when they're the oldest. And across every single graph, we saw a decrease in reported physical activity or participation in sport across the primary school years, which we think is quite alarming and is kind of a good rationale and background to our research, because as we've seen, as you saw from what Flaminia was showing, we know that sport can benefit people in terms of mood, in terms of physical health, in terms of processing of information in your brain. So it's slightly worrying that there's such a decrease of physical activity and participation in sport across childhood at a really important time when children need that sport to help develop as healthily as possible. So from that, we've looked at some other factors that can impact cognitive processing, so that front part of the brain that Flaminia was talking about, the processing of information. And in this graph, we're looking at mean reaction time. So again, just how quickly it takes someone to react to a specific stimulus on a computer screen. In this case, as you can see in the picture, it was smiley faces. And this is also looking at the primary school years. So on the left-hand side of the graph is the youngest, and on the right-hand side is the oldest primary school children. And across primary school, we can see a decrease in reaction time. So as Flaminia pointed out earlier on, that's better. They're getting better as they're getting older because it's taking less time to react. So lower is faster, so it's a better reaction time. So that's what we saw here. As expected, you get older, your brain develops, you get more experience, you can react faster to things. Thank you, Flaminia. I was almost ready for the next one. Another thing we looked at was socioeconomic status. So in this graph, again, we've got mean reaction time on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, we've got the percent of children at schools taking who receive free school meals. So we've got data from a whole group of schools, around 12 schools, and for each school, we have the proportion of students who received those free school meals. And for free school meals, a greater percentage is a greater number of students receiving the free school meals, so is a lower socioeconomic status. And as you can see, the direction of the graph is different, is the opposite here. So with a lower socioeconomic status, we have slower reaction times, which is worse. Then we moved on to look at waist to height ratio again, which is the same measure of kind of body composition or obesity that Flaminia mentioned previously. And we see the same direction of graph here. So as children had a greater waist to height ratio, so a potentially less healthy weight, we saw slower reaction times. They took longer to react, and in essence performed worse, which is quite an interesting result, that on such a, if you like, basic measure of cognition, just how fast you can react, there's such a dramatic effect of different body compositions. And then finally, bringing it back to physical activity, which is the focus or large focus of our research. Here, the question, the type of physical activity that we looked at was activity during PE class at school. So again, asking children to say how active they were during PE class. And the direction of this graph goes back to what we saw in the first slide about just across primary school years. So the numbers 1 to 5 along the x-axis. 1 represents the least activity during PE class, and 5 represents the most activity during PE class. So as children do more activity during PE class, they're then able to react faster on a reaction time task. So lower is better because it's less time to react. Which shows the benefit of physical activity in yet another way, but in children this time. Thank you, Elonia. Thanks. And again, we have differences between boys and girls. This time we're looking at a slightly different task. So the previous task, as you saw, it was the smiley faces, and every time there was a smiley face on the screen, children had to react. This task is what we call an inhibition task. So again, there's lots of smiley faces. You react to every smiley face, but then some of the smiley faces are actually winky faces, and the instructions are to not react to that. So the point of the task is to really pay attention, react as fast as you can when you're meant to react, but the moment you're not meant to react and you see a winky face, to be able to hold that back, to be able to inhibit that response. And here we're looking at the number of errors made, so the number of times that children were not able to stop that response. And what we see is that boys made more errors than girls, quite consistently in our tasks. But then it becomes really interesting when we look at the effect of physical activity on boys and girls in terms of error making. So the type of physical activity here is how much physical activity they do outside school. So we ask them about after school, the evenings, the weekends. And what we see here on the left-hand side graph is the line's pretty flat. There's not much change in females, in girls, in terms of the numbers of errors they make, depending on whether they say they do a lot of sport or not a lot of sport, physical activity. The amount of outside school activity they do does not seem to impact the numbers of errors made. However, on the right-hand side, in the boys, that graph decreases quite dramatically. So the more activity outside school the boys say they do, the less errors they made, which is quite amazing if we think about what sport might be or activity might be helping to develop in primary school aged brains. And then we took this a little bit further and again looked at physical activity in the same task, but this time its impact on reaction time. So what we're looking at initially, how quick children able to react to stimuli. And here we saw the opposite trend. So on the right graph, in the boys, the line's quite flat. There was no effect of the physical activity levels on reaction time. However, in the girls, on the left-hand side, the more physical activity they said they did, the faster they reacted. So we have boys making more errors than girls, but we have more active boys making less errors, and we have more active girls being faster. So that's a really nice story and some interesting research we have done. And then finally, to link it back to what Flaminia was showing you, our next big step is to do some brain imaging in children. And we have some really amazing connections with a lab that the images on the left-hand side come from, where they do brain imaging in tiny children, even babies and newborns. And it's the same technology as we use. And on the right, that's our data from our lab doing in adults. So we're hoping to go in and target the midpoint there with kind of primary school age children and adolescents at some point.
Thank you very much, Evie. I'm always fascinated by your research. I find it really interesting. And by the way, if anyone on the call hasn't heard of an initiative called Pint of Science, pint as in pint of beer, but Pint of Science, if you Google that, at some point in May or June, every year across the UK, pubs invite academic speakers to go and talk about their own science and their own research. And I know that Evie and a few of her colleagues will be presenting her research at the next event next June. So have a look on Google, Pint of Science. There's lots of really fantastic lectures for lay people, and you get to have a beer while you listen, which is quite nice. A nice change from university settings. So on that note, with a couple of minutes to go, I will go through the degree that if you choose to study Sport and Exercise Medical Sciences at UCL, this is what your 3 years of study would look like. So we have a series of themes that go across the year. Sorry if this is a bit dark. So the red modules are the modules focused on understanding the heart and the lungs and sport performance and designing training plans. And then finally, so you get the basis of how the body works, the lungs and the hearts and the musculoskeletal system. And then in year 2, you learn to put that together and how to design a training plan. And then in year 3, you learn how to impact those, what we call marginal gains in elite athletes, and how do we make them milliseconds faster and a little bit stronger. But remember, this is it's a medical sciences degree, so it's not only about elite athletes, it's about general population. So you do get a full stream of modules that focus on anatomy, learning how to read medical imaging, infection, inflammation, and repair in the nervous system. And then in the 3rd year, you learn how to assess injuries and how to create a rehabilitation program for a person who has been injured and wants to be able to run again, for example. Then you also get a series of modules that give you a very strong foundation on how the body works in health and in disease. So you learn about all the other organs, the kidneys, hormones, the gut and the liver, what happens when we take drugs and how do we metabolize them. And then you move into pharmacology and nutrition. And finally, in year 3, you pull that all together into sports nutrition. So you get very well-rounded view from that perspective as well. You also have a focus on health and disease and neuroscience. So we learn about health and disease in year 1 and the molecular basis of diseases in general. But then you start to learn more about sports psychology and exercise psychology. How do we make people active? What are the barriers to getting sedentary people more active? But also what happens to athletes when they train, and you might relate to having to put up with a little bit of, let's say, depression or anxiety going for competitions and performance, and how do we overcome those barriers with athletes? And in year 3, we learn about exercise neuroscience, which is what Evie and I were just discussing now, and exercise medicine. So if we have a cancer patient, how do we recommend exercise for that patient? And what does that do to their body? How can exercise help prevent the development of cancer and certain specific types of cancer? Same with pulmonary disease, with heart disease, with obesity, with diabetes. Can we reverse type 2 diabetes with exercise and nutrition and managing healthy lifestyles? So these are all the things that you explore in the degree. And finally, you get to do your own research. So we teach you what research looks like in year 1 and year 2. And then in the 3rd year, you do your own research project. And all of the data that we just showed you and those results, those come out of student projects. So those are types of things that you can get involved in. But of course, there's a lot more happening at UCL. There are colleagues that look at injury prevention, injury rehabilitation, There are colleagues looking at supplements. So what happens if I give beetroot juice or cherry juice to my athletes? Does that make them faster or stronger? Caffeine and creatine, etc. So there's quite a lot to choose from. So I think what's important to remember is that this degree gives you a very strong foundation in medical sciences. So it's not pure sports science, it's not just focused on elite athletes, it's focused on the population at wide and how exercise relates to clinical populations and how do we prevent injuries in athletes as well. So these are some of the formats of how you might study. There will be some lab-based biochemistry and using microscopes, but there will also be some lab-based work using treadmills and bikes and getting people active and sweaty. You will learn how to assess an injury, and you will learn how to design a training program for healthy people and to get them stronger, but also how to design training programs for patients. If I have an elderly cohort, and how do I design the appropriate training program for this cohort? You will learn how to test performance in athletes, for example, a VO2 max, like I showed you earlier, or some strength tests, but you will also learn how do we assess patients using the same techniques that we use in elite athletes? How do we use that to assess a person's health and support the prognosis in a disease working with clinicians? And of course, a lot of this is based on thinking critically and solving problems. And we focus on teaching through the latest evidence in scientific research. So what you will learn next year at university might be different to what we learned 10 or 20 years ago at university, because we're always teaching you the latest science, which is really important. You will conduct your own projects, as I've said, which can be from a range of topics. You will learn through the big lecture rooms, and there will be the full university experience from that perspective, but we do focus quite a lot on small group teaching and collaborative learning. So these are some of our students in our institute working together on some projects and before or after their lectures. And this is our students playing around with VO2 max tests or practicing presenting to each other. You will learn how to create a scientific poster to be able to then present that at a conference. But ultimately, whatever you pick at university, it might be this program in sport and exercise medical sciences, or it might be something else. But remember to pick something that you are passionate about. You want to spend 3 years of your life studying something that interests you. So in this case, if you're passionate about physical activity and exercise, whether it's with athletes or with health, the general population or clinical populations, then this might be the program for you. One thing I should mention before I finish is the difference between our program and a standard sports science program. So if we go back to the program, one thing that you'll notice if you look through the modules in sports science degrees that are given by other universities that we don't have at UCL, they are purely focused or mostly focused on working with healthy populations. So there's a bit of the coaching theory and sports analytics, sports performance, and all of it is working with healthy people and trying to get them to perform better, essentially. What this program gives you is slightly different to that. You get a very, very strong foundation in clinical sciences, or medical sciences. So what a sports science program does not teach you is the foundations of how the body works in health and in disease. So that is what we specialize in. So there is a smaller focus on elite athletes. So what we might discuss in terms of elite performance, there is this sport performance optimization in year 3, and then there's the injury assessment and rehabilitation in year 3. But otherwise, most of the program is generally focused on the general population and on clinical populations as well, with all of these modules. A third and last thing I should mention is if you are interested in becoming a physiotherapist, you should not study sports science or sport and exercise medical sciences, but you should study physiotherapy. A sports science degree does not give you a physiotherapy qualification. However, what many of our students do is they do this degree which gives them a very strong foundation and provides the exercise input that you do not study in a physiotherapy course. And then they do a master's degree in physiotherapy. So then they have both. They have the foundations of exercise and health and disease and performance, which physiotherapy does not teach. And then they do the master's in physiotherapy that looks at how injuries happen and the healing process, which we don't provide in that much depth. And the physiotherapy master's degree then gives you the qualification to work as a physiotherapist. So those are a few things to consider, or common questions that I normally get in these sessions. But that's me. If there are any questions, feel free to send an email to any of these addresses. And apart from that, I think I'll stop sharing screen now and can take any questions if there are any from attendees.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much, Flaminia and Evelyn. I do have some questions here, and everybody do feel free to send in your questions. So the first one that I have is, as an IB student, would taking chemistry be an essential or useful for this course?
Taking chemistry is very useful. It is not essential anymore. At the moment, we've dropped chemistry, so biology is essential. Chemistry is desirable. So if you have done chemistry, it puts you in a very good position with all the genetics and biochemistry modules that you'll study. Having said that, if you did not study chemistry, you'll be fine. There is a module that we provide for students who feel that they need a bit of extra support to catch up on some basic chemistry to be able to undertake the modules. So either way is good.
Great, thank you so much. And the next question we have is, what are the possible postgraduate courses that would be advised after this course?
There's lots of different outputs that you can go into. So as I said earlier, physiotherapy is one option, and many of our students do that. Some of our students go into graduate medicine. We've had several over the past years go into graduate medicine. UCL doesn't offer graduate medicine, but things at Queen Mary's do, for example. And otherwise, we have students that have gone into clinical physiology, into cardiovascular physiology. You can even go into crossover into engineering. There are quite a lot of students who graduate from sports science that then cross over into an area such as neuroscience or engineering and do something slightly different. So it opens up quite a lot of paths for you within the science realm, so to speak.
Great. And that answers another question that we have about, can you do medicine as postgraduate after this course?
Yeah.
Fab. So another question that we have is, what would a typical week look like studying this course?
It depends on the year. So usually I think you can expect to have, so you have 4 modules every term. Each module will roughly have 2 hours of face-to-face teaching. There might be an additional hour of lab work every week, for example. So that's about 8 to 12 hours of contact time studying throughout a week. And the rest of the time is very much independent learning. So at university, you're encouraged to develop your own understanding beyond what we provide you as lecturers. We give you the bare basics, but then you have to go off and study on your own and develop your understanding of the fields.
Great. So another question that we have is there a specific sport ability needed to do this course?
No, we take students from all backgrounds, and some of them aren't necessarily highly sporty, but they're more interested in the clinical applications of exercise with patient populations. So you definitely do not have to be an athlete to come on this course. We will not test your fitness.
Great. So that's all of our questions for now. Whilst we wait for a few more to come in to see if anyone has more questions. Evelyn, would you like to tell us a little bit about what your favourite part about being at the ISEH is, or UCL just in general?
Yes, of course. What I was just thinking as I saw the slides about the course, how I wish I'd done that instead. It looks amazing. The mix of kind of sport focus and biochemistry and all of that. My favorite part about being at the ICH, I think, is kind of summarized or very much alongside what Flaminia was saying about the course, in that it's such a mix of people who have similar interests but are coming at them from different angles and backgrounds. So in our office, all the people teaching the course, it's a mix of researchers, of sports scientists, of physios, of doctors. It's such a mix of people, and having the input from people with different backgrounds, different ways of approaching a problem is really amazing. And just when I'm sat around, I mean, it's the best distraction method is what we're just being sat. It's a big open plan office, and when someone starts a conversation about something interesting and you've got everyone pitching in from different points of view, I really think it's a really great environment to work in. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. We have another question. What could I add to my personal statement to maximize my chances to be able to attend this course?
That's an excellent question. I think so. One of the, I guess, common mistakes that I see in personal statements is that some students who are quite sporty, because you're applying for a sports science degree, you assume that the academic, the assessors are looking for achievements in sports and how many goals you've scored and how many teams you've been in and how many medals you have. And while it's a fantastic achievement, make sure you focus a lot more on what you've learned through that, if that's something that you want to talk about. Getting lots of medals in itself will not get you into university, so you're not being examined on your participation in sports, so remember that. But if that has given you more discipline, or if you've learned some leadership skills by being a team captain, for example, or if you've done some volunteering, teaching other children or other athletes through your club, those are the things we're looking for. We're looking for skills, we're looking for work experience and academic experience. So if you are really passionate about sports science, well, have you read anything recently that's scientific about developments in the field, and has that caught your attention? Maybe you read on the Times magazine about, I don't know, the impact of exercise in reducing the incidence of cancer. We'll talk about that and how that fascinated you and how you want to study something along those lines. So those are the things we're looking for. Also remember that this is a sport and exercise medical sciences degree. It's not just pure sports science. And one of the mistakes some students have made in the past is that they focused their application purely on sports science. So talking about coaching and elite athlete performance and setting up gyms, etc. But that's not necessarily what we provide. So if we are your first choice, make sure that it's clear what the medical sciences element of the course, what attracts you about that. How do you plan to implement your knowledge in medical sciences once you obtain it through the course? How do you plan to implement that in the workplace, and what do you think, what are you thinking of doing there? So those are a couple of tips. So yes, talk about your sporting endeavors, but don't focus on how many goals you've scored. Focus on what you've learned about yourself and others through that.
Great, thank you so much. Lots of good tips there. I think you did touch on this earlier, but just another question that's come in. So does UCL offer medicine as postgraduate after this course? I believe the answer is UCL doesn't offer postgraduate medicine.
No, at the moment, UCL does not offer postgrad medicine. Other universities do, and they will take you if you have a UCL degree. We will have master's degree and things like sports medicine, but which you can take having done this degree, but that doesn't turn you into a medical doctor. So if you want to do medicine, you'll have to likely go somewhere else afterwards.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. Those are all of the questions that we have at the moment.
I see another question, India. If doing medicine as a postgrad would be for standard 6 years, and the answer is no. I believe it's 4 years. India, do you know how postgrad medicine? Is it 4 or 5 years?
I think it is 4 years if the university offers postgraduate medicine, and then if the university, such as UCL, we don't offer postgraduate medicine, so you just have to do medicine anyway, which I believe is 5 years.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's right. It's 4 years, but double check on university websites. I'm pretty sure King's and Queen Mary's offer postgrad medicine, so you can have a look on their websites.
Yeah. So what are the possible career opportunities that this course opens? Really good question.
Very good question. So I think the good thing about a sports degree is that it doesn't funnel you into one specific job, and you do have lots of options that open up to you. So as I said earlier, you can always do what we call a vocational degree. So you can go into medicine, or you can do a master's degree in physiotherapy, which I believe is 2 years. And with that, you get an accreditation as a physiotherapist, and you can become a physio who is specialized in sport and exercise. But without doing either of those, you can go into the sports industry in lots of different capacities. So you can work in elite sports as a coach. So you can do, you know, the standard routes in working in performance with teams. You can then go and set up your own business, of course, and whether it's coaching or setting up a gym or injury prevention, etc. So those are always possibilities. We do have graduates who go into sports analysis. So that's when you work with a team in analyzing performance. So through data, through cameras, and capturing data through wearable devices and GPS, and looking at how the team performs. We have graduates who have gone into industry partnerships, looking at, for example, the development of either new technology or new supplements. So if you think of a company like Nike or Adidas, they will have sports scientists working for them, helping with product development. Same with supplements, the supplementation industry. There's a company called SIS. I think it stands for Science and Sports. If anybody runs marathons, they will know their gels. So those types of companies will employ sports scientists to help with developing their products. So you can go into industry, or as Evie did, you can get a PhD, and then you can become a researcher, work in academia, become a professor, and have an amazing life, because being a professor is great.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay.
I'm sure there's more career options I haven't thought of. Oh, well, one obvious one I should have mentioned is working in clinical exercise physiology. So there is an accreditation of clinical exercise physiologist that exists that you can take after a degree, but what we set you up to work specifically with patients. So there is quite a big focus on developing exercise plans and exercise recommendations for patients of specific diseases. So that's definitely something that can be done. Or you can work in a hospital as a physiologist and do exercise testing on patients and work alongside clinicians. So there's a very broad range of things that can be done afterwards. Sorry, India.
No, that's great. And I think like when you do the course, you do sort of figure out your niche and what you're really interested in. You pick up things, just as Evelyn was saying, that like you'll hear a conversation and you'll be like, oh, I'm actually really interested in that. I want to do more. I want to learn a bit more, do a project. And then you sort of like develop in that way. So you probably find what you want to do afterwards once you're doing the course, and you can find out a bit more about your interests. But yes, that was a great answer. Thank you. We have another question here. What would be some other courses at UCL that's similar to this one?
So the Sport and Exercise Medical Sciences degree comes under a family of programs called the Integrated Medical Sciences. So you can look up IMS, Integrated Medical Sciences, and similar programs. So they all share most of year one, half of year two, and then none of year three. So you will be studying alongside colleagues who are doing nutrition and medical sciences. There is engineering and medical sciences. There is medical sciences and innovation. There's applied medical sciences. There is another one around infection and immunity, I believe. And there's another one around cancer. So there are quite a lot. I think there's 5 or 6 different programs that share the same core modules that you all do together, but then the focus is slightly different as you separate. And what's great is that you are allowed to switch between these programs after year one. So let's say you start studying with us and you do sports, but actually cancer seems more attractive. So in year 2, you can switch over to the cancer program, for example, or the nutrition program.
Great, thank you. We have another question here. Do you look at EPQs alongside A levels when it comes to applications and admissions?
I'm not sure. That's a question for the admissions team.
Okay.
I'd recommend emailing that.
Yes, so I think that the email is in the chat and you can send, yes, it is, and you can send that question in and somebody will be able to get back to you on that one. But thank you for asking. Okay.
I think we've exhausted all the questions.
I think we have, yeah, but do send some in if you do have any questions that you're wanting to ask. We've got 10 minutes left, so there's time. If not,
well, India, why don't you give us a brief summary of your experience if there are no questions?
yeah, sure. So I, if you missed at the beginning, I'm a medical student, but I intercalated in sports and exercise medicine in my third year. So I did a year with the ISEH. I really, really enjoyed it. It was really nice to learn about sports because I'm also a rower, so I'm interested in sports anyway, but using it and putting it on like a clinical, using it in like a clinical setting, especially when I went into my fourth year and I had my orthopedics module. So we were learning about injuries and rehabilitation there, and it was really nice to have like a background on it like that. But one of my favorite parts about the course was being able to use all the equipment in the labs. So when you go into the ICH, it's like a really impressive building. It's lots of cool equipment there that you can use, and you're actually trained up on how to use it. And you can use this equipment in your dissertation as well. So you can actually collect your own data for your research. So that's really nice. And it just makes your dissertation, I was really proud of my dissertation because I collected all the information myself, and I feel like you'll feel the same. So I really enjoyed my time there. And yeah, the facilities are just amazing.
Well, yeah, India did very well in her dissertation. So yeah, it was a really interesting presentation at the end as well, because you did SUBTs, right? Is that right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I was doing all the proprioception and with the graduated compression socks and yeah, all the balance.
Yeah.
It was work, but it was good. It was fun. Okay, so I don't think that we have any more questions. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Oh, actually, sorry, we do have one more. In terms of scholarships for the course, how would that work? This one.
So there isn't a scholarship that's specific to this degree, but if you get in touch with admissions, they can let you know if there are any schemes across UCL and the wider university for scholarships.
Okay, fab, thank you. And I'm sure if you just go onto the UCL website, there'll be an email there, I think specifically for scholarships and bursaries that you'll be able to contact. So they'll be able to get back to you on that. But if there are no more questions, then I think that will be the end of the webinar. So thank you very much. And if you could please provide us with your feedback about today's sessions by filling out our evaluation form. It will be sent to you following today's event, and that would be greatly appreciated. The link will also be put in the chat for the evaluation form. And thank you for all of your comments and questions. And thank you to Dr. Flaminia Ronka and Evelyn for an excellent session today. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.